Listening to all of the commentary, I think I'm reminded of a comment my grandmother used to say when we weren't behaving very well. And it kind of operates at two levels. What she would say is, enough already. And I think some of the argumentation that we've heard, I think, is strained. She would say, knock it off. Also, with regard to what we have and the problems we have, I think the last presentation certainly was the most sober. We got it right. We are looking for a problem to solve. We don't have one as great as we think. Let me make a few comments about the national security rationale, the related comments about energy security, which is really another form of national security, and comments about nonproliferation, which is another form of national security. Different takes, I think, than some of the speakers, but not entirely. First, I think it's a mistake, and we're getting into the habit of doing this, and we should get out of it before we get to the point where we don't take notice, of taking a commercialization problem that can't be financed privately because it's too risky, the demand is too uncertain, the technology is too uncertain, and it's too expensive, and turning to the Defense Department and saying, you know, you really need this. By the way, I thought we were broke. I mean, it was my impression that the defense budget, as rich as it is being cut back. So saving money is really important. We should not be looking for extra things we do not absolutely need in the defense area. That is for sure right now. But what we do is a great article in the Wall Street Journal about biofuel initiatives. A very sensible move by, I might say, the House Armed Services Committee, looking at the question of should we continue to buy biofuels? Very expensive, $26 a gallon, it said in the article, compared to about $4. And the answer was, gee, maybe we ought to back off of this. It'd be nice if we could do this, but we're kind of looking at our dollars. By the same token, arguing in favor of military requirements for small modular reactors on bases in the U.S. and USEC for tritium, all that, I think is strained. In a richer, flusher time, we could tolerate it. But it's not a season. It's not the time to be making these kinds of arguments. I realize it's an election year. I realize Ohio is important. I realize delegations sit on certain committees. We should put that aside. That is not national security. That is politics. And we should at least be willing to say that. Because that is mostly what's going on here in the case of some of these enrichment arguments. Now, another line of argument that is made, by the way, I'm going to make a recommendation. I think you really have to wait until there really is clearly a military requirement and then go after these things, not back into a military requirement. I work in the Pentagon, and getting a military requirement is not easy. I think we need to depend on them coming up with these things and then pursuing them. Now, if it turns out in pursuit of a military requirement, you develop GPS and has some commercial value, great. But you don't try to commercialize GPS by getting the Pentagon to figure out that it has military requirements. It's the other way around. I think we got that wrong. And we're getting it wrong. And we need to back away from that right now. The second point I'd make is these non-proliferation arguments I find rather odd. I mean, if we're worried about Iran and persuading Iran, and first of all, I don't think you can persuade Iran very much. But if you were going to take that argument seriously, presumably it would lead you to arguing that we shouldn't be subsidizing uneconomic activities like they are. That, I think, would cut probably against the case for an awful lot of argument about national security involvement of government in promoting things like enrichment. I think in addition, being a reliable supplier, which was this sort of old argument. I take this from, is Tom Cochran here? Yes, sir. Many years ago, he made an argument that reliable supply, which is the argument, and it's a respectable argument. So but it comes from a very unrespectful place. Where'd it come from? Well, the British argued before they got rid of the slave trade, that they had to be in it to control it. That's where that argument comes from. I don't think we need to be making that argument, and here's why. I don't think it's a supply lever that we need to have to control trade. Rather, I suspect, just as we're discovering from the comments from our friend from Urenco, having a demand for a product may afford us a lever to reach out to the Urencos, the Ross Adams, the Arevas, and say, look, you want to come into this market, we've got a few requirements we want you to take a serious look at, like nonproliferation. We have not looked at it that way. We need to get into that habit because our market's more interesting than our supply for obvious reasons. We don't supply very much. Not anymore. It's like arguing that we should leverage the behavior of companies that make televisions by getting back into the television production business. Good luck. I mean, it's all gone overseas. So if you deny them access to your market, though, that would get their attention. So I think that's backwards. Also, as far as being a leader in the industry, if I'm not mistaken, there's a 50% chance Silex may do just precisely that. As risky as it is, it's certainly a very interesting technology. Irresistible if it delivers on what it claims. I don't know, we'll see. But it's not like we're totally behind the curve on new things we can do without the government. Now, there were comments about the stockpile, highly enriched uranium, low enriched uranium. There's some items that I included in your package. One of them is a internal DOE memo, which really makes for interesting reading. I assume all these people have been fired because they say things that their secretary no longer wants to say in public. But among them is there's a lot of material that can be drawn from, and that the amount of material required to make tritium is not that significant. And that this problem of tritium production could be taken care of from existing stockpiles. Now, that isn't what the secretary says, but that's what this internal memo says, and I think it's right. Now, this matter of the legal interpretation, by the way, when I was in the Pentagon, whenever we wanted to get an answer that was no, we would go to legal counsel, because we knew that our local legal counsels in the department always were no lawyers. If you wanted to get a yes answer, you'd go outside of the Pentagon to the private sector, and whatever the answer was, they'd say, yes, we can do that for you. So I'm not surprised they interpret it this way, but I am surprised that we're letting them get away with it. I think what's really good about the CRS legal memo, and there is a copy of that, it's in your package. It was done by your compatriot, Todd Garber. He's actually a kind of clever guy. I want him on my team. I haven't met him. He argues, go this way, that way. It's a matter of policy. Policy? Boy, can we change one thing in this town. Policy. Want to save some money? Change the policy. I don't see the legal problem. They don't see the legal problem. The DOE people don't see the legal problem. The LES people don't see the legal problem. The only people see a legal problem, the people who do not want to do it less expensive. I think that's fine. Time for a change in policy. This is not rocket surgery. You can figure this out. Now, I guess the other, arguments about energy security, I think we worry an awful lot about the lack of electrical power in this country. We worry about solar power, wind power, nuclear power, non-nuclear power. This is weird. Our key vulnerability is energy for transport, not electricity, which increasingly is being fueled by natural gas. If you have any doubts about this, go to Forbes on the web. If ever there was a non-problem, on a list of top 10, this would be 53. Oil pricing may even change the transport sector in the long haul. We'll see. Some people talk about the U.S. exporting oil. It's pretty wild. I don't know. The odder case still is that being made that the U.S. needs to give more federal loan guarantees to assure enrichment capacity. You are living proof, your company, is you don't need that. Sorry. You may want it, by the way. I know you want it, but you don't need it. You get the contracts, you go to the bank or you go to the investor in-house, you give them a business plan, and they buy it. If you don't have the contracts, if you're a REVA, what do? You get a conditional loan guarantee, you think about it, and you bug out. That's what they've done. They're not building Eagle Rock. They may in the future. But they've looked at the figures. I don't know what's wrong with that. It seems to me the enrichment area is one where you can calculate the profits, and they're much easier to realize than in the case of using nuclear fission to boil water and make electricity. That's harder to figure out how to make money. But enrichment, that's straightforward, luckily. So this is an area where I think mucking around with loan guarantees and all sorts of, not necessary. The business plan works. Now, I think there is a connection with national security and enrichment, but it's not clearly in these areas. Oh, one other comment. This is, the Armed Services Committee probably will not touch this for another decade, but, you know, if you really are concerned about not having enough highly enriched uranium, I have a suggestion, too. Start looking at making some of the subfleet conventional, not all of it, but some of it. And start looking at some of the fleet not using Q. You will be awash in the surplus if you do this. It will take a very long time to run out of the material. And that will serve nonproliferation. Because right now, the Iranians, the Brazilians, Pakistanis are talking about getting a naval reactor program. And they know what they're up to. They want to get right to the edge of bomb capacity. And they want to get away from having to be under safeguards, because you can withdraw it for a naval reactor. We might have an interest in showing folks you don't absolutely have to follow the American example. Just a thought. Radical one, but something to think about. There is a connection, and it's with the question of proliferation and nuclear terrorism. I don't know how real nuclear terrorism is. I don't know how immediate the proliferation problem is, but it's my line of business to say you got to worry about it. And if you are, highly enriched uranium is a problem. Silex could be a problem because, boy, it makes centrifuges look like a hard thing to do with regard to hiding things. Silex would be a lot easier to hide. And then there's just problem people saying they have a right to get right at the edge of making bombs when you're making the fuel. Here, a couple recommendations I'll close out. I think it would be, first of all, as I mentioned, very useful for DoD to develop military requirements that it competes for answers before it's forced to pay out for any given solution, and that should apply also in the area of enrichment. But in an aside, I would start going to some yes lawyers, not no lawyers, and I would think about policy. Stop running around saying the law is making us do stuff when it isn't. No more loan guarantees. We have enough already, and we can't even get rid of them. I'm not wild about them at all. I think they distort a lot of things. Let the market and fuel contracts dictate the enrichment area in particular. I would say no more for enrichment, that's for sure. I think if we're concerned, we should, about Hugh and Lou and all this, we should make some arrangements, maybe with the Russians, about blending down. The Russians don't seem to want to talk about that. Well, we should be. And that we're not, I think it's kind of disturbing, actually. And Pete Domenici actually would agree with me on this. And that may be the only thing Pete Domenici and I agree about. It's interesting to agree on that. Finally, I think, and this goes to your next panel, I think you're going to have to start internalizing the costs and risks associated with making fuel with regard to safeguards. I hope you will draw on the expertise of Mr. Cochran and Ed Lyman. Maybe they can participate in your panel. They've done work for NPEC. It's very good. It's a big problem. You can't keep track of an awful lot of this stuff. And we're not really charging you guys some of the fees associated with doing even a mediocre job of it. We do a less than mediocre job. We can do a mediocre job. And you should have to pay a little bit for that. And I think at some point the IEA, for all of its weaknesses, will have to be more involved in this. in the end. And it may be eventually some form of internationalization, I suppose, which is a really scary thought. I'll end on that note.